This is Target Score Weekly with Joey Slattery and Taylor Allen. Welcome into another edition of Target Score Weekly, our special season preview. Taylor Allen back on the podcast, and we have some special guests coming in just a little later on. Christian Aumell, the play-by-play voice of the Winnipeg CBEL, will be joining us, as is Dave Larkins. He's with Wesmen Athletics. You might have heard him on the broadcast last year, filling in on the color commentary. Big basketball fan, great knowledge of youth sports and the CBEL. It's a great conversation. Can't wait to get to that. But we got to get some things first. It's been a busy couple of weeks for you, Taylor, because you still have your Blue Bombers beat. So you've been at, I keep calling it IG Field. What's it called now? Princess Auto Field?
Princess Auto Stadium. I keep wanting to call it Princess Auto Field as well, but no, it is Princess Auto Stadium. So, I mean, you can't keep track. All these arenas, all these stadiums in all sports are changing their name every year or two or three or four or five, and it's whatever. Half the time people still call Canada Life Center MTS Center, and that hasn't been the name in like 15 years or whatever.
Skydome in Toronto, same
exactly.
deal.
People can't keep track, so whatever.
Yeah, but how was it? I mean, that's football's intense. I mean, I was covering the CBER's training camp, and it's 2-a-days and everything else. But I mean, the rosters are pretty concentrated. Not a lot of cuts. How's it been with the Bombers being there for that whole time, and the names coming in and out, and their preseason starts this week too?
Yeah, I mean, camp's not over yet, but I mean, yeah, camp's always kind of exciting, but also overwhelming. And it's like the first day of school, kind of in a way. I mean, you're handed this roster of 70 names for rookie camp, and you've heard of maybe 10 of them. So you're quickly trying to, figure out like who are the best stories in camp, who are the best players in camp, who actually has a shot at making the team, who isn't really even worth talking to or watching because they're just here to put on the helmet for 10 minutes or whatever. So it's always kind of overwhelming, but also really exciting. And the kind of the beauty of the CFL is, for example, Byron Mullins wasn't the only Ohio State player that was signed by a Winnipeg team recently. The Bombers signed the Ohio State Buckeyes all-time leading receiver, KJ Hill, former NFL draft pick, guy who played for the Chargers. And you're like, okay, this guy, he's one of the best receivers of all time at one of the best NCAA schools, obviously Ohio State. And he played in the NFL a little bit, whatever. Of course he's going to make the Bombers. Of course he's going to do big things in the CFL. Well, guess who got cut last week and isn't even going to get a chance to play in the preseason game? KJ Hill. So that's kind of the fun thing, but also kind of the stressful thing about covering CFL training camp is it's so unexpected. There's so many bodies, and the guys who you think are the favorites to make the team quite often don't even come close. And it'll be the guy who went to some Division III school and put up kind of modest numbers there, but for whatever reason, the CFL game suits him better or something like that. So yeah, it's always a good time. And of course, with the Bombers, it's even kind of more intriguing now that they're coming off of not one, but two appearances in the Grey Cup and losing both. So yeah, I mean, they made last 4, but lost the last 2. So yeah, the veterans, now that they're in camp, they're obviously feeling a little extra motivated this time to not have that sour taste in their mouth for a third year in a row. So, and Chris Trevler's back too. So everyone's, having a good time catching up with him and seeing him back on a CFL field and whatnot. So yeah, lots of storylines with the Bombers as always. So that's always been fun. It's taken me away from the court where you've been with the CBERs, but luckily I have your number. So, I could pick your brain as to what I'm missing down at the Sport for Life Center. So how's CBERs training camp going so far?
It's been good. I mean, they've now turned the page on it. Now it's gone from training camp to season prep as they prepare for Saskatchewan in just a couple days. It's what are we today? Monday, May 20th. So they play on Wednesday, the 22nd. But yeah, it's hard, man. I mean, those guys are, a lot of them saying the soreness is kicking in, and big thing Mike Taylor said this year with more experienced guys coming in off of seasons overseas. There's a lot more, individual kind of plans for each guy in terms of who needs recovery and things like that, because they're doing 2-a-days, right? Not saying they're going hard 2 practices a day every time, but a lot of it has to do with more the play learning, and things like that in their schemes. And Mike Taylor was pretty open with that on some of the things they have to establish, and it's a lot, right, to go through. Unlike the training camp with the Bombers, where you've got weeks and preseason games, you come here, it's like 5 days of training camp, ends with a like a inter squad game, and you're thrown in the fire into a 20 game season. So it's there's a kind of a sense of urgency, but you can tell there's a elevated experience, definitely an elevated skill there as well. And we haven't even seen all the players. Like David Mwenken hasn't even showed up yet. He's still finishing his season, I believe, in Spain or Germany, sorry. And yeah, so he'll be joining the team a little bit later, but very exciting. I mean, this is a team that feels they have a chance to win a championship. Byron Mullins saying that was one of the biggest draws to come here when he first was introduced to the team, saying that, he wants to win a championship. That's something that's eluded him throughout his career. So, he feels he has a good chance here. But, just seeing the CBL saying too, Winnipeg's got better, but this is a big year for the league. They have the most NBA experience they've ever had in a season. I think it's 10 players that have played multiple games in the NBA. So it's going to be a good season. A lot of excitement around the Sea Bears, but I don't know how much it's going to change, how elevated in terms of, will there be more wins than last year? Because I think other teams have elevated too. So I think we're just going to see a better brand of basketball. That's for sure. And we're going to get into that full throttle in just a few minutes here with our panel. But yeah, it's going to be exciting. I see that you're wearing your Pacers hat.
Oh, did I? Is that the hat I put on today?
Yeah,
that honestly,
is the
I just
hat.
woke up.
Yeah.
I just grabbed a random hat. I wasn't even paying attention.
Yeah, so interesting.
Oh, and there he is with his big, goofy Celtics water bottle.
Yeah, well, we look nice with a big, goofy championship banner hanging at the rafters at TD Garden. But you know what's funny? Last week we had Byron Mullins. I was a little upset that you weren't around for one answer particularly, because I asked him what his favorite NBA place was to play, and he said Indiana.
Of course.
And he said he played the Big East Conference championship there, and he said it's pretty fun. And I was like, oh man, I'm like, this is
Big
this
Ten,
is right.
Big Ten Conference.
Big Ten, sorry, yeah, Big Ten Conference championship. And yeah, so he said that's a fun place to play. Probably gonna be a fun place to play for the Celtics. I think this is gonna be quick work. I don't know how you're feeling about your Pacers after the Knicks nicked, and you guys got through to the conference final. How are you feeling?
Everyone's talking about the Knicks, how they were hurt and, they had no chance and whatever. And I get that. The Pacers did not play a Knicks team anywhere close to full strength. And yes, it still went 7 games. However, the Knicks-Pacers rivalry is one of the best in basketball. And I don't give a damn who's on the court for the Knicks or who isn't. You beat the Knicks, Game 7, can't even say it. Game 7, Madison Square Garden, and you shoot nearly 70% as a team from the floor. Sign me up, man. Like, that was an absolute blast to watch. It was terrible seeing Jalen Brunson fracture his hand, because despite playing for the bad guys, he's honestly one of my favorite players in the league to watch. I just love the way he plays and how he is basically single-handedly turned around that disaster of a franchise. Has been great for the league and just great to see. And he has an awesome story too, of course. So that sucked. But yeah, just like it felt so good to have like that taste of the 90s back with these two teams. And obviously the style of play is a hell of a lot different now. But yeah, I mean, Indiana, man, I mean, the injury gods, it kind of sucks, but the injury gods have been on their side these playoffs. I mean, it's not exactly how you want to survive and advance in this tournament, but Giannis missing round 1 and Dame was banged up for the Bucks too, so that obviously helped. And then again, playing the Knicks, who Julius Randle's been out since January, and OG, he tried to play yesterday. He played for 5 minutes, but he had to get taken out of the game as well. And then Brunson, and then Josh Hart had something going on, so he wasn't himself, and it just goes down the line with those Knicks. So, but yeah, I mean, advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals, somewhere they haven't been in I believe 10 years, feels good. People are talking about the Pacers again. I mean, they're getting the least amount of love out of the final 4 teams left, which I would expect, and that's okay. So we're playing with house money, man. We really are. And I think the Pacers are the deepest team. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's game 7 in MSG, and Rick Carlisle is still like going deep into his bench, right? Like Ben Shepherd, this, late first round pick, he's still on the floor, like in the fourth quarter and stuff. Like, this is a team that does not play like Denver, who play their star players, 40 plus minutes. Like, they have a rotation. They got guys off the bench who can make plays, and they trust them still in the playoffs. So does that win you championships? Yeah, not necessarily. It's usually the teams with the biggest and best stars, of course. But I mean, hey, no one's giving Indiana a chance against the Celtics, and that's probably fair. But I mean, if the injury gods keep going the way they're going, I mean, Kristaps Porzingis is, his stats kind of up in the air, and I think if he plays, yeah, this series is probably done in 5 games. But if Porzingis does not play, I think this series will actually be a little more interesting than people think, or at least more interesting than you think. So yeah, I'm excited, man. I mean, again, house money. If they lose in 4 games, so what? We're kind of just happy to be here. But if they somehow pull off the upset, then oh baby, let's go. So yeah, fired up to be a Pacers fan right now for sure.
I said that in a prior podcast. I said that the Pacers are a team that could make a run. They're exciting, they're young, they're naive. This is, like you say, house money. There's no real pressure right now because they've already exceeded. And I'll even shout out the Knicks fans for giving the standing ovation to some of their players after the game yesterday when they were subbed out. Kind of realizing that even the Knicks overachieved this year in a good way. So usually New York fans are pretty brutal when it comes to losing, but it was nice to see the recognition of what the Knicks did accomplish this year, even though they lost to the 6th seed Pacers. But either way, I think it's you win, man. This is the playoffs. People are hurt. This is what teams are structured for and are prepared to deal with. Celtics have done the same thing. I was glad that Cavs series was done. I think the Celtics got into some bad habits there. I honestly think it's going to sound weird that they were a little bored. Been there, done that. The conference, this is like even conference finals. There was no real celebration that they qualified for the conference finals. That's the expectation. But I was glad it was done where they had some games to recover, because I'm really hoping Missoula is running those guys through and getting back to the systems, because when things were going well, they were playing the way they're supposed to play and they're built to play. But then they go into these, the isolations with, Jason Tatum trying to fight for shots that aren't there and running down clock way too low and allowing teams to come back. Defensively, I think the Celtics, even without Porzingis, are strong. And I think the Eastern Conference Finals, the Pacers are a better team, especially when you take into account Donovan Mitchell was out for the last few games for the Cavs. But I think they're going to be more focused in this time. And, I'm looking forward to seeing guys like Derek White. I'm sure he'll be up against Halliburton. Jaylen Brown will take some turns there. But it's going to be a tough task for the Pacers. I have no concerns whatsoever for the Celtics. I think they're going to roll through. And, I think it's going to be Minnesota Celtics will be your final this year. And, I enjoyed watching the Pacers. They were a fun team to watch this year. But I'm very excited to watch their demise in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Oh man, I can't wait to clip that last 30 seconds and replay that over and over and over again when the Indiana Pacers shock the world and knock off the Boston Celtics. It's going to be beautiful. But with that said, I do think Boston's going to win in 6 games, but hey, we'll see. Stuff happens. But yeah, actually, it was actually kind of funny. I was flying back home to Winnipeg yesterday from Miami. So I watched I watched the Pacers and Knicks game on my Delta flight. And that's a great way to watch a sporting event. I mean, you're strapped into your chair. Yep. You got the headphones in. You can't go anywhere. You can't use your phone. So you really got to pay attention to the whole thing. And it was fantastic. So I would recommend. And then I had a layover for 3 or 4 hours in Minneapolis. And the airport was electric for the T-Wolves game. I was at one of the bars watching the game with a bunch of Minnesota folk and stuff. And that third quarter they're down 20. The room is dead, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, classic Minnesota sports. Come so close, get everyone's hopes up, and then they crash and burn. And Anthony Edwards, of course, out of all the days to have a bad game, this is the day he chooses to do so. And Cat is playing his ass off, all for nothing. Oh, sky's falling. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And then something changes, man. They just keep marching back. Naz Reid, their incredible big guy off the bench, gives them some huge minutes down the stretch. Rudy Gobert, unbelievable fourth quarter. I absolutely hated that trade 2-3 years ago when they picked him up, and now look like a total fool, as many of us do, because he has been sensational for this team. Karl Anthony Towns is a guy who people have, kind of said some not nice things about, right? And, have kind of, knocked his play quite a bit over the years. And kudos to him, man. Like, he made some tough buckets last night that really kind of helped buy some time until Anthony Edwards kind of woke up more towards down the stretch. So, yeah, congrats to Minnesota, man. That is such a sensational story. I mean, this team has really done nothing for 20 years, right? Has wasted so many lottery picks, hasn't been able to attract any free agents, has been really one of the biggest dumpster fires of an organization in the NBA. And now they're back, like they're here, and they just knocked off the reigning champs on their home court. They beat Denver 3 times in Denver. So yeah, I think they're so much fun to watch. And I think if someone knocks out the Celtics, Minnesota's the team to do it, because they just have, so much momentum right now. They got the star power. They got some guys off
Good
the bench who are giving them
matchups,
big
too.
minutes. They can shoot, they can defend. Like, their defense, like, it's cliche, defense wins championships. And what's Minnesota doing right now? They held, I think, Denver to 37 points in the second half last
Yeah,
night. Like,
that's when they
oh
clamped
my
down. That's where it
goodness.
started
So
defensively. And, going to your Gobert point, it's funny what can happen when you structure a team, where a player can play to his strengths as opposed to having to exceed what he has to do. I mean, he's been a great interior presence. Yesterday, I think after that, like, his fadeaway shot to me was kind of like the dagger when he hit that shot,
unbelievable.
the buzzer beater. I was like,
Unbelievable shot.
yeah. And I think they were down one, I think, going into the fourth quarter. It was a 1-point game regardless. And I remember thinking, I'm like, it's over. Like, Denver's lost this. It's just, they've let Minnesota crawl back in. They started hitting shots, and you could see Anthony Edwards, like, just kind of feeling himself the further the game went in. And he's always so light, like, he's intense, but like, he doesn't ever feel like, he doesn't show that negative energy ever. Right. Like, that's the other thing. It's just like, he's always just got that positive outlook of, like, he doesn't care about the team's past. Does, like he was saying, like, they were making fun of it really in the post game comments about the last 20 years. And the cool thing is, they did it on the 20th anniversary from their last Game 7 win in the semifinals when Garnett was playing, when they took out my soft spot Sacramento Kings. But no, it's interesting. It's been a really fun playoffs. I'm excited to see the Final Four here. There's going to be another new champion again for a 6th straight season, which is awesome too. You're not seeing a dynasty, a lot of parity in the league. But it'll be interesting. It's going to be rough for us for these next 4 games, but we'll get through it, and we will remain steadfast in our podcasting.
Next 7 games.
Okay.
Because,
all right. All right. But this is a CBEL podcast, Taylor, and we have a great CBEL season preview for you with our special guest. Let's waste no time. Let's get to the next segment here, our season preview with our special guests. We have C-Bears play-by-play man, Christian Aumell, joining us. Christian, how are you doing?
Feeling very good. Excited to call more basketball. This season should be a lot of fun, and the Timberwolves just made the West Finals, so everything's good.
Yeah, you're a huge Timberwolves fan, and you're also going to be hitting the road for the first time this year because CJOB's on the roster this year, so that'll be fun. You'll be at the season opener. We also have Dave Larkins. He is with Wesmen Athletics. He's also filling in on color commentary for the Sea-Bears when Dave Crook is not available, and he's a self-proclaimed basketball expert, so we thought, hey, we'll give him a chance to come on Target Score Weekly and show his chops. How are you today, Dave?
Appreciate it, fellas. Thanks for letting me be around, and I'll try not to embarrass myself too much here today.
Don't worry about it. That happens anyway, and Taylor and I do it on a weekly basis. So, new season around the corner. This one is very exciting, obviously. I mean, I think we can all agree last year was a great inaugural season for the Sea-Bears. Last year, they finished 12-8. They were in second place. They got to the play-in game, which they hosted, but it was back-to-back losses to Edmonton. They lost that final game of the season last year, which gave them home advantage. They still played the play-in game at home, but then they lost that second time to Edmonton, ending those playoff hopes, or the playoff run, I should say, fairly early. But some major acquisitions in the offseason. This roster does look quite different from last year. Christian, I'll start with you. Based on what you saw last year and the acquisitions made this year, how are you feeling about the roster makeup?
Better, I think, is the first word that comes to mind. This team last year was, it had its strengths, and namely Teddy Allen was the strength, but there were too many holes on the team and too many stretches where if it wasn't Teddy creating, they didn't really have a lot going on. And I think they've really bolstered pretty well everywhere around him, right? In terms of secondary scoring, I think this team is going to be much more improved. You bring in a guy with G League experience like Darius Days. I think at the point guard position, I'm curious to see what the difference is between Jelani and perhaps Jared coming in, because Jelani's not here. And he was the sixth man of the year, right, in the Canadian Elite Basketball League. So that's certainly a loss for the team to not have him back. But the CEBL, for those who are new to it, because this is the season number 2 for the Sea Bears, there's a ton of turnover every year because all the contracts are 1-year contracts. So you're used to seeing just a few guys come back from year to year. Having Teddy Allen back is the number one big thing for this team because he's the MVP. But Joey, we were talking to Coach Mike Taylor the other day, and he made some good points about how this year Teddy shouldn't have to carry as big a load as he did last year because he's got more additions that can help out. And I'm curious to see what Byron Mullins looks like, a guy that tall that can stretch the floor. And as I mentioned, Jared Ogunbemi-Jackson coming in, playing for his home team. You got veteran guys like Alex Campbell coming in, and then a young Canadian point guard in Mason Borsier, who I think can really spread the ball around well. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic about what this team can do, especially because you still have Teddy Allen, but I don't think he's going to have to, shoulder the load as much as he did at times last year.
Yeah, and Dave, I'll get your reaction too. I mean, when you were looking at the offseason transactions and the new signings, what was your impression of the team once it was all set in stone?
Well, the way they rolled it out is they announced their Americans later on in the offseason. And so my initial reaction was they've really gotten better with their Canadian depth. And in this league, that's really important, as we know, with the ratios of having to, have Canadian players on the floor. So I thought that was a really big improvement early on in the offseason. And then, touching on what Christian talked about, their guard depth got much, much better. And, fair point about the secondary scoring. I think I echo what Christian said there. They got better there. One of the things I'm curious about is how they're going to, how Coach Taylor is going to juggle all of that extra talent that they've brought in. It's a good problem to have, of course. But yeah, their guard depth got better. And now you just say, okay, well, how do we juggle these minutes? And, Jelani Watson-Gale was a really fun player to watch, a really big piece of what they did last year. But I think overall, in terms of team depth, they've upgraded what they've done or what they have in the backcourt.
And one thing that Mike Taylor did talk about, and Taylor, you and I talked about this a lot, was especially during the preseason, offseason, was he said that the Canadian talent was going to be priority number one going into the offseason. And you're right, they loaded up off the top. So one guy in particular that's made a big buzz here, Jared Ogunbemi-Jackson. Taylor, for those that are not watching on YouTube, that's good, because I hate that Pacers hat that you're wearing. This is going to be the only time Taylor and I talk, and it's going to be very limited until these 4-game sweep of the Celtics over the Pacers happens. But I'll start with you, Taylor, with this one. You grew up in Winnipeg. You know what Jared Ogunbemi-Jackson meant to the basketball community here. Just how big of a pickup is that to have a local point guard who is elite in this country and has proved it internationally?
Yeah, the local side of it is great. It's a great story, obviously. It'll help sell tickets. It'll get people more excited about the team and whatnot. But never mind what city he's from. It's the player that he is, right? And what he's bringing to this team. I mean, you look at the team last year, like Christian, like Dave were saying, I mean, when it comes to Canadian talent, they were kind of lacking there a little bit last year. Like Teddy really kind of covered some flaws on this team last year. And Jelani Watson-Gale, people weren't expecting him to play as well as he did. I mean, he came into this league with very limited pro experience. He played Div 2 or Div 3, whatever it was. And he really surprised a lot of people. So this year they really needed to beef up their Canadian talent. And Jared was a name that everyone kind of had circled, was kind of thinking about, hoping the Sea Bears would sign. And when you can bring a guy who has 8 or 9 years of pro experience playing overseas, playing in some of the top leagues overseas and producing big numbers. He's coming off of one of his best years yet, and he just played in one of the best leagues in the world in Russia. To add a guy like that who could score, who can run your offense through him, he can pass, he can play D, like he can shoot. Like he's a massive addition. And yes, of course, everyone's focused on him being from Winnipeg, coming out of Garden City Collegiate and all that good stuff. But he is night and day difference for this team at point guard last year when they had Glenn Yang, who had some good games and whatnot, but he just didn't have the experience or talent that someone like Jared Ogunbemi Jackson does. So it's going to be really fun to see what he can do with Teddy Allen. That's going to be really fun. Really fun duo on offense for sure.
Yeah, and we talked about that too. The roster gymnastics last year of trying to put Jelani Watson-Galen at the right times, and Glenn playing point guard when it's not really his natural position. But Dave, you've been in U Sports for a long time now, so you have seen the Jared Ogunbemi Jacksons playing in Calgary, even Mason Bercier coming in with Trinity Western, and before that UBC. And I know he spent some time out in Ontario. But with the Canadians that were added, those two guards particularly, I mean, what's your impression there? What do you think they can bring to the table this year?
One of the things I'm going to be interested in is just how the ball moves. There's one ball to go through all of these guys. With Jared, I think let's go to actually Mason first. He's a guy that can create a ton for himself off the dribble. So he's a guy that you're going to be able to get some value out of in terms of scoring, just based on his own ability to get his own shot, which is I think in some cases was lacking last year. Jared is a guy that he's an engine. He'll do everything that you need. He can be a distributor. He can be a shooter. He can be a scorer. I'm excited to have him back in the city just to be able to watch him play again. He was a fun kid to watch when he was a kid in high school. And unfortunately, he went away to Calgary to do his university. But I mean, he is a really fun player to watch. So, again, I'll find it interesting how the offense looks in terms of their ability to one ball and get everybody the looks and the touches, and have everybody eat, as it were. That'll be interesting to see how they handle it, what the offense looks like, what they're actually drawing up and trying to do. But they've got more options now trying to score the ball.
Yeah, and Christian, as Mike Taylor was saying during training camp, he feels it'll be easier for Teddy. And one of the things that I had asked too is it that easy, right? I mean, Teddy's a guy who creates his own shots. That's been his bread and butter. And last year, he seemed to thrive in those situations. Do you foresee any issues with, the ball going around, or do you think this is something that maybe can exploit Teddy when he's got some support around him, like exploit his strengths, I should say?
It's going to be interesting to see the timeline of how it all works because of the nature of the league, where he got here a week ago, right? Last Monday night, he arrived in Winnipeg. They play in 2 days as we record this on Monday, May 20th. So it's a really quick turnaround to try and develop chemistry. I think you have to play some games really to know. And in a 20-game season, it might take a little bit. We saw that last year, right? New team, never played together before. It took some time to figure out who they were. And who they were was a high volume, not necessarily high percentage shooting team. They shot a ton. They put up a lot of points, and they gave up a lot of points. And that was, in a simple way, what they did last year. So if they can increase their efficiency a little bit and allow themselves to not get broken down in transition, coming back off of makes, and allow their defense to set up, I think that's going to be huge for this team, because we've talked a lot about offense, but defensively, this team had a lot of flaws last year. And they were simply put not a great defensive team. They outscored their problems a lot. And especially there were early in the season, a lot of top target score finishes where they had big leads and they just evaporated, right? And they were able to win some of them. A couple of them, not so much. They were usually able to survive them. But yeah, this was a team that went 12-8. It was a lot of fun, but it had its flaws. And I think this year, it on paper looks like Mike Taylor's done a decent job of addressing those flaws. But of course, we have to actually see it in game form to know if what he has done is actually going to work.
Yeah, that target score time last year played with a lot of teams too, right? Some teams were really good at target score time, and oftentimes that team behind is the team that kind of takes momentum into that, right? Because you can't just dribble out the clock if you've got the
I
lead.
love it.
I love it too. I love the fact that you have to play through the entire game. It speeds things up. It gives, even if you're cheering for the team that's down, what I like about it is that it's kind of like baseball. You're never out until that final basket's hit. But Taylor, going to you now, how important is this start for the year? So we've got 2 games right off the hop, one in Saskatoon against the Saskatchewan Rattlers, who, lost Justin Wright Foreman, but they brought in Jalen Harris, who was with Scarborough. And then they come home to play the defending champs, Scarborough Shooting Stars. So you kind of have that first rivalry game on the road. And then that first game back is going to be an exciting one with the defending champs in the house. Now, how important is it for this team to get wins? And do you think they'll be able to hit the ground running?
Well, I think it's always important to get wins, but I think that these first 2 games, I don't think in the grand scheme of things, they're that important. I mean, this is a funny league, right? Like the training camp is so short. Guys are coming from overseas. Guys are coming from wherever in Ontario or whatever they've been doing these past couple months and showing up at different times in training camp. Some guys barely even making it to training camp at all. And some guys not even making it for the first week or 2 of the season, if not coming even later. So I think the first couple weeks of the CBEL are kind of a little unpredictable, a little all over the place because this is pro basketball. Like guys do need some time to gel. This isn't a pickup game at the Y. So yes, the Sea Bears, they have probably twice as much talent as they did last year, honestly. But like any basketball team, they're gonna need some time to figure out how to play together, how to work together, and whatnot. So it'll be fun to see how these first couple of games are. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it would be the end of the world if they go 0-2. Not that I foresee that happening, but really, it's what you do at the end of the year. Right? Like the Sea Bears, they kind of peaked in the early kind of mid part of the year last year. Then towards the end, they kind of trailed off a little bit. And then EJ Anasike leaving, obviously, couldn't really overcome that. So yeah, these first 5, honestly, even 10 games, kind of whatever. Work out the kinks, just make sure you're still in the playoff spot and hit the ground running really towards the end of the year. And, good things will probably happen.
And looking at it, like last year, Edmonton took that 3rd spot with 9 wins, right? So they were 9-11 that year. And I kind of agree with Christian on that too. They could very well go 2-0, but I think it's going to take some time to build that chemistry in a game situation. And I think the team has the talent. The only tricky part with this league for me is the fact that it's a 20-game season. It's a lot more like football in the sense that, we saw it last year. They'd go on a run, but then they'd lose a game or 2. And then there's that sense of pressure that you wouldn't get in an 82-game season after a loss or 2, right? So it'll be interesting to see how the team reacts to that if it does happen, because there's not a lot of time to bounce back, and every game does have a little bit more on it. Dave, you were talking about the Americans being the late announcements. That was also a late announcement on the forwards, because when they were making these signings, we were talking about how much they upgraded at the guard position. But like we said, they lost EJ Anasike last year, and it showed in the playoffs how important he was to that team. Now they bring in Darius Days, he was a star in the G League. He's got some NBA experience, 4 games, I think 2 seasons ago with Houston. But then you got Byron Mullins, a guy who played 5 seasons in the NBA, former first-round pick. He's played around the world now, and this is a guy who's 7 feet tall and can shoot a 3. How impressed are you with the Americans that Mike Taylor brought in, and do you think that he's kind of addressed those weaknesses that might have been there last year?
I think anything that they lost, they were able to replace. And one of the things with Mullins will be interesting to see. I mean, what does he have in the tank to play at this level? I mean, he played in Taiwan and had some short-term success there. Not a huge resume there in terms of games played, but he had some success over there. He's played everywhere. Name a country, he's been in it. And I'm curious what his fit is, how he enters into this team and benefits them. I mean, for one, I think they got better there with rim protection. So now, going to Christian's point earlier about being a better defensive team, I think they've upgraded there in terms of having a guy that can protect the rim, and also he's athletic. Even at 35, he's still an athletic dude that can go out and guard on the perimeter too, which is what you need among your modern day bigs, right? So And then Darius Days, yeah, I mean, Anasike was a major, a major piece of what they did last year. I mean, Days is your sort of typical 3-and-D type of player. So that's the kind of guy that you want out on the wing. I don't know that he completely replicates or for sure upgrades the loss of Anasike, but I think he has the potential to. So, we talked about it in last season a little bit, just us guys off camera kind of thing about the Sea Bears making this a destination place, guys that want to come to Winnipeg now and play for the Sea Bears. And I don't know how much of that played into the signings, but certainly they've created an environment here that guys want to come and play here. And they've brought in some dudes that are pretty legitimate. I mean, Darius Days playing in a G League and playing some NBA games just as recent as a couple years ago or last year. I mean, that's pretty significant. So, yeah, I mean, they've created an environment that guys want to come and play.
And we haven't even talked about, when we talk about experience, we haven't even brought up Alex Campbell, a guy who is even a CEBL vet. I mean, you guys played in Vancouver, won a championship, I believe, out with Sask in the first year. This team last year, Christian, was young. I was inexperienced. They had professionals, but most of them were early on in their career. I think one of the big things we talk about the talent and how that appears to be upgraded, but I think the experience is upgraded quite a bit as well. And when you talk about that youth sports element where you've got guys coming in that are still in university, I mean, how big is this going to be, I think, in terms of the improvement of just approaching the day-to-day and taking in these pressures that might come throughout the season? How much do you think this experience is going to play a role in the success of the Sea Bears this year? Or is that overrated?
No, I think that there's definite value to that. I think last year, for sure, there were some times where the team seemed a little green, but there's a lot of dudes that have a 3 at the front of their age this year, and not in a bad way, right? Like Byron Mullins, mid-30s. I think it's a valid point Dave brings up about what he still has. But I think you've got guys that are just into their 30s, right? And I think that is going to help this team for sure. Chad Potchmus mentioned it on day one of training camp, how this team just is older now and more veteran presences like Campbell, who, talent-wise, is it a big upgrade? I don't know, a little bit, but he just, the know-how and the basketball IQ and that experience, I think, is super important for this team that's trying to take that next step, right? And there's still young players on the team for sure. You've got Simon Hildebrand, who's still only going to his 3rd year of university, and was a very good player for this team last summer. But I mean, ultimately, this is I think an older team. It seems just on paper to be a wiser team. I just get the vibes that it's going to be a more cohesive basketball IQ, higher level team, without ever having seen them play together, of course. But I just got that vibe from every acquisition that the Sea Bears announced. I thought, oh, yeah, okay, I see that. Yeah. It seems like they were going for a more experienced lineup this year. And that's not to say an old lineup, but I think it's a lineup that brings with it a decent amount of know-how. And again, on paper, I look at this and say, this looks like a better team this year than last.
And you look at even just the fact that you've got, we talk about the age of Byron, but you've got Chad and Byron who are, 7 foot and right at 7 foot. And there's nothing saying that you can't put them both on the floor at the same time if need be too, especially with Byron's ability to step back and shoot the 3. But looking at start with the conference. I don't think we're too worried about the Eastern Conference so much, but I mean, there's been a lot of movement in this conference so far. I mean, with Calgary looking at the signings, they're the defending conference champions, but for instance, they lost Mason Bercier, who was a key part of their team, to the Sea Bears. They brought back Ruggsy Miller-Moore, but I don't know. I can't really tell based on their signings without seeing them play if they've elevated or if they've come down or are they somewhere in the same spot. Vancouver underperformed last year. I think when the season started, we thought they would probably go on a run. They were hosting. You thought they'd build up, and they just didn't live up those expectations. But they watching some of their footage on Instagram from their practices, and hearing Kyle Julius talk about it, he wants guys that are dogs, and he feels that he's got those guys that are going to go out and scrap. And when you got a guy like Nick Ward, he takes up a lot of room inside, and he's hard to guard, and defensively he's hard or offensively, if you're the offensive team, he's hard to get around as a defender. So I guess, Taylor, we'll go to you for this one. How do you think this roster kind of stacks up compared to the rest of the conference? I think Winnipeg might be the early favorites to take the conference championship, but do you think that is simple? Like, do you think that's going to be a sure thing? Is this something that we might have to put the brakes on a little bit and see how the other teams stack up?
Yeah, there's no such thing as a sure thing, especially in a summer league with only 20 games and so many different moving parts and so many teams being new and bringing in so many different players and whatnot. But it was interesting, though, because actually you sent me this the other day, Joey, the betting odds for the favorites to win it all this year. And the Sea Bears are like 5th or something like that, right? Like smack dab in the middle of the league. And it's like, really? Like, no one been paying attention to what Winnipeg has done this offseason? I mean, look at some of the signings they've had. Like, they've gone better and they're 5th. So, hey, that could be some easy money to place a bet on those guys. But yeah, I mean, the West, it's a good conference. I mean, you look at Calgary, like you said, it kind of runs through them. I mean, Steph Smith, Sean Miller-Moore, that's one of the best backcourts in the league. 2 Canadian guys as well. Also have a good Canadian big in Justin Jackson as well.
Yeah.
Nick Ward, probably maybe the best big man in the league. He's certainly up there. And like you said, Vancouver really underachieved last year. They had their spot to championship weekend already cemented as the host last year. And, Alex Campbell, he spoke to him a couple weeks ago, and he's kind of like, yeah, when you have that spot in that weekend, it definitely, it's hard to kind of get that out of your head and whatnot. So now that they don't, it'll be interesting to see how maybe that changes how they play. But yeah, I mean, I feel pretty confident saying Winnipeg is the favorite, at least in the West, because for me last year, they needed more Canadian talent, they needed better shooting, and they needed more help for Teddy. And I think they checked all 3 of those boxes. I mean, every team has good American players, but the Sea Bears got even better with their American players this year. They improved their shooting, improved their depth, got way better with their Canadian talent. So for me, I feel pretty confident saying they're the favorite, but that really doesn't mean anything. And last year I was wrong. I said the Sea Bears were going to be one of the worst teams in the league. They proved me wrong. So who knows? Maybe this year I'm overhyping them and they're going to underdeliver. So we'll see.
Yeah, those odds too. Like, Montreal was the favorite to win. I can't remember what the exact odds were, but it doesn't matter. And I think the big thing there is just the fact you get the advantage because you're guaranteed a spot in the Final Four. So I don't read too much into that. It kind of makes sense that they'd be a little higher up, because regardless of how the regular season goes, they just have to win 2 games at the end, which, again, we've talked about this. Won't get too much into the format of the playoffs, but that's something I'd like to see kind of fixed down the road. But then I think about it, is there something that we're not seeing? Is there something that we don't know when you see, the Sea Bears 5th on that list? I think Edmonton was lower on that list too. And there's a team that really gave Winnipeg a hard time last year. Dave, I see you shaking your head. I'll let you open up on this, but how do you feel about the expectations from outside of Winnipeg for the Sea Bears? And when you look at teams like Edmonton that gave them a problem and look very similar to last year, maybe even elevated a little bit, do you think that's a team that, that rivalry might even hit another level this year?
Betting on the CBEL seems like a very difficult thing to do. And betting futures on the CBEL seems like a very difficult thing to do. So I'll leave that for other people. Edmonton, to me, feels like a team that could be trouble. Kept a good part of its core together. And as you said, gave Winnipeg trouble. And so, yeah, look at it. Everybody's in the same boat in terms of the short training camp, the quick ramp up into the season. And you talked about it earlier in the show about how these first couple of games, how important are they? How important is it to get a quick start? I don't think you're going to have any kind of clue until maybe a couple of weeks in. And I'm not smart enough to roll the dice on who exactly is clear-cut favorites and whatnot. I mean, I think Winnipeg is going to be among that. I think there's going to be a really difficult challenges in this conference, but I certainly wouldn't be ready to make any bold proclamations other than I think Calgary, Winnipeg, Edmonton. You've got three pretty big heavy hitters there.
Yeah, and I'm just looking now, like to bring up some of the signings for Edmonton. They got a local star, former NCAA guy in Ben. I want to make sure I pronounce this correctly. I think it's Ben Kreik. And then they also signed a former first rounder themselves in Jacob Evans, right? So Christian, we saw last year how hard Edmonton played Winnipeg, and they played really well in Winnipeg, particularly with the last two games of the year being, the first one particularly because EJ was still there, the upset that really ended the bid for Winnipeg to finish top of conference and allowing Calgary to take that spot. And then they come back 6 days later and eliminate them altogether. So, looking at the additions they made on top of their core, do you think Edmonton might be overlooked a little bit?
There's a couple things. First of all, there are in every sport, there are teams that have your number, and it's not always the best team. Sometimes it's just one team matches up well against you, and for some reason, they're the one you struggle with. I think what we saw at the end of last season, the regular season game against Edmonton just kind of came in and took Winnipeg's lunch money, and Winnipeg just had no response. In that playoff game, it was absolutely there for the taking, and I really just think not having EJ there sunk the team. They needed his interior play. They needed his rebounding. It wasn't there, and they got exposed in that way. But to Dave's point about prognosticating the CEBL, you've got this fairly young league still that has a lot of roster turnover year over year and very inconsistent up and down results for teams over time. And you've got teams like Winnipeg that are in their second year. You have teams that come and go. In fact, this is, when has the CEBL ever had the same teams from one year to the next? It doesn't usually happen. So I think if you want to bet on the CEBL, I think tread lightly and be careful or unless you see, the numbers could be more out of whack because there's just more inexperience in setting the numbers for a league like this. So either go lightly, or if you think you can expose something that you think is wrong, like the Sea Bears being fifth, if you think that's silly, then there you go. But I remember talking to Mike Taylor on my show before the season even started last year on their jersey reveal night. And I just casually brought up, because the Sea Bears were at the bottom of the betting list as a new team. I said, I don't know if you saw the betting odds. He immediately was like, yeah, no, we saw. Like, it was a motivating factor. So putting them in the middle when they feel like they've added a lot and they're a confident team, maybe they use that as another motivating chip going into this season, where they think, hey, we put out this incredible product in year one. We almost won our conference. We think we made our team better, and we have the fifth odds of winning the title. It's betting futures is always fickle because, you're giving a betting company your money and then they have it for 4 to 6 months, and maybe you get it later. But it's also fun, right? Because if you back the horse at the start of the year and they win, that's awesome. Compared to now, like Boston Celtics, they've been minus odds for everything this whole playoffs to win the finals. But if you bet them at the start of the year, you get better odds. So I don't know. It's tough because we're also in the Winnipeg market, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I have to admit, I've never been to a CBL game in a different market. Looking forward to doing that a couple times this year just to see what it's like, because at a Winnipeg game, it's amazing. The atmosphere is amazing. And I know in other places it's not, right? Like, there were playoff games last year that had 1,000 people at them when Winnipeg drew 10,500 people at Canada Life Center. So I guess the Winnipeg hype maybe hasn't extended to the betting market, that they overvalue the Sea Bears. But I know here for sure, I think we all agree that this team seems like on paper it's got a chance, but we haven't seen Edmonton play this year, and we haven't seen Calgary play this year, and we haven't seen Vancouver play this year. So in hindsight, in a month and a half, we can look back and be like, oh, wow, we really undervalued, or we overhyped that team. But right now it's tough to really know, because in this league, it's not like the CFL where the Bombers are going to be good every year because they've got the same lineup. CBL, it's a lot more volatile, I think. So I like the Sea Bears, but maybe Edmonton's a bad matchup again. It could very well happen.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Disclaimer: we're not giving betting advice. That's
No,
for sure.
God, no.
I'm not. But yeah, you're right. It could be very volatile from year to year. And I've been to Edmonton. It's been years since I've been there, but you go to that market where they play at their Expo Center, and it's 5,000 people in this more intimate setting. A lot of fun. Basketball's popular there. They got new ownership. I'm sure that's going to climb. You're going. Oh no, so you're not going. You're going to be in Calgary, but they're playing at the Wynn Sports Center, whatever it's called. But that first game is at the Saddle Dome, and that's expected to break the record set by the Sea Bears, according to some of the teasing posts I've seen on Instagram. So I think on the west side it's growing, but you're right. You go to the east. I mean, I went to a game in Brampton, and if it weren't for it being the school day game, I don't know how many people would have been there. And, you've got the odd celebrity rolling in terms of, whether it's Jamal Murray or Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and stuff like that, which is great for the league to have that kind of exposure. But there's something missing in Brampton where they're just it's not hitting. And then you go to Niagara, just a little bit further down the road. They seem to be doing well, and they put a great team together year after year. I mean, that's another team. I mean, I think if you're a Winnipeg fan, you're probably happy they're not in your division because they've got a really strong team as well. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But if we look at the challenges ahead, and Dave, you touched on this a little bit earlier on, was, the ball not being able to hit everybody. It's one ball to go around, so to speak. So I guess we'll start with you, then we'll go to you, Taylor. What do you think the biggest challenge is going to be for the Sea Bears this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's something that a lot of teams will be facing, but I think it's that, we've gone over it already a few times, but just that cohesion of, chemistry early on, chemistry throughout the season. Teddy Allen's going to be playing in a system, maybe not a system so much, but with a team that looks very different and has more options. And so, his volume might go down somewhat. He's never going to be scared to shoot it. We know that. He's always going to get his, but the demand or the of him is going to be maybe a little less because they do have other options. I think it's really just a chemistry thing. Let's, how quickly can we put this thing together? How quickly can we come together as a group? To me, that's the biggest thing, because I'm looking at the roster and I'm thinking, okay, they've got more size. They've, interior, they're a little bit better. They've got more guys that can shoot the ball. I mean, we've gone a whole 34 minutes here. We haven't really even talked about Simon, who was a big part of their group last year. How does he fit in terms of, is it going to be the same kind of role? So, I mean, there's just more options. And so how do they put it all together? I think, again, I said it earlier, it's a good problem for Coach Taylor to have, but he and the coaching staff have got to figure out, how do we put all of these pieces together and make it symbiotic.
Taylor?
Yeah, I'd agree with Dave for sure. And I mean, last year, I think the team was perfectly built for Teddy, right? For him to do his thing, lead the team on offense, help them become an MVP player last year, right? And now this year, his role is going to change a little bit because they have so much more talent and stuff. So how is it going to affect him? I'm sure it's going to benefit him, but you don't really know for sure until you see them out on the floor. But another thing that is a challenge for them, I think, is just expectations, right? Last year, people in this town were just happy to have a basketball team, and they were happy that they were winning a couple of games, getting some momentum. Where this year, it kind of feels like championship or bust a little bit. I feel if this team, makes it to playoffs and doesn't win the championship, people will be not that they're going to be having a Vancouver style of riots in the streets or anything like that. But I think people are going to be pretty disappointed, right? Like, I think people are drinking the teal colored Kool-Aid this offseason, right? Very excited about lots of these signings that the team has had, and they're thinking that this team can win it all, and rightfully so. So I think this team, coming into this year, they can't fly under the radar. People know they're talented. People know they're good. People know that they have the best barn, in the league, best atmosphere, best fans and whatnot. So it's kind of like, okay, like there's no excuses. Like, this is a team that's built to win a championship. And if they don't, people are going to be disappointed. So we'll see how that affects the team, especially the guys who were on the team last year who really kind of, I'm not going to say they had it easy, but, it was a bit of a different mindset last year as a first-year team. No one knew what to expect. And, people like us were saying before the year started that they weren't going to be very good. So they kind of got to have that chip on their shoulder. And this year, they don't have that luxury. So I'm kind of interested to see how they handle that this year.
Yeah, kind of playing with house money a little bit last year. And I agree with Dave. I think there's going to be a lot more management component this year, more than we'd think, maybe because of the star power with Mike Taylor. And, we barely talked about Simon Hildebrandt. We haven't even mentioned David Mwenkat, who hasn't even been here yet because he's been playing overseas, finishing his season there. So there's another thing that comes in, or another element that comes into play here. And Christian, for you or your cat, very cute cat, by the way, what do you think is the biggest issue that we have to look out for going into the season for the Sea Bears?
Well, my biggest question for them is, can they defend? I think that's a big thing. And interior wise, right? Are they able to deny penetration? Because they've got these big guys for sure in Mullins and Posthumous, but Posthumous last year often didn't play a ton of minutes, especially as the season went along. His uses went down and down, and part of it because I think he got hurt, but there was some ineffectiveness in there as well. And so I think the Seabirds will be able to score again this year. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but have they elevated their defensive play? Can they take care of the defensive glass, and can they make sure that they're not having to outscore problems like they were having to do so much last year, right? So there were games for sure that they won comfortably, definitely, but they also lost 8 games, and several times it was, they weren't able to get big stops. And so I do wonder about that. And I don't know if that's a concern so much as it is just a question I have, because I don't think I've got a ton of concerns beyond what you've already mentioned in terms of every year there's a lot of roster turnover. So how do these guys play together? That's a question I think a lot of teams have to ask, and we'll find out over the course of the next few weeks. But my big thing is just, can they be better defensively? Because last year that was definitely a flaw.
All right, we'll end with this great insight so far, but this is a 2-part question. Your projection of how you think their record will be in 20 games in the regular season, your projected record, but also what a successful season will be for the Sea Bears. So not your projection might be less or more, but what the baseline of a successful season for the Sea Bears this year. Taylor, we'll start with you.
I think it's championship or bust. Like, this team is built to win it all. They have the experience. They have the Canadian talent. They can shoot. Like Christian said, we'll see defensively if they kind of meet the rest of those standards. But I think the expectation is for this team to take that big leap and at least make it to the finals. And anything short of that, I think, would be, a bit of a disappointment, honestly. So I think in the regular season, I could see these guys winning 13 or 14 games. I think that's a really strong mark in this league. I don't think teams going 18-2 or whatever is realistic. There's a lot of parity in this league, and again, so much roster turnover and whatnot in a short season. Some tough scheduling conflicts as well and whatnot. So I don't think anyone really running away with it is too realistic. So yeah, I think 13 or 14 wins, and I think at least a finals appearance at the very least. Otherwise, the Sea Bears fans will be disappointed for sure.
And Dave?
Yeah, I was going to settle in around 13 wins myself. And I think even if they have an identical record to last year, I don't think that you look on that as a regression or anything like that. I think Taylor's point is fair, that this is not a league where typically you're going to see an 18-win team, somebody running away with it like that. There's just too many factors in this league that, if you were to have, if you get to 15, that's probably a really significant, remarkable kind of season. So 13, I think, is a good number. And yeah, I mean, they've got to be in the tournament at the end of the day. I don't think anybody with that group, from coaching staff to roster, would disagree that that's their aim, that is their goal, and falling short of that would be disappointing for them. So 13 wins and get in the tournament.
And Christian?
Yeah, in the seasons that they've played 20 games, 15's been hit once and 14's been hit once. So I think to have 14 would be huge. The number that popped in my head when you first asked the question was 14, which I think is ambitious for sure. You look at last year being 12-8, and there were some games they should have lost in that 12, and there's some games they should have won in that 8. So where they actually were in terms of the rest of the league, I don't know if that really matters, but I think this year, I think it's right to have expectations. I think it's justified to look at last year and say that was a really good foundational season to establish this franchise in this city and in this league. Now you have to make that next step, and considering that they've already been given the championship weekend for next year, I think there's a building up to that process, right? So I'm not sure winning this season. I mean, you want to win a championship every year, of course, but I think making a step beyond what they did last year is what we need to see this year. So whether that's advancing the championship weekend on your own accord, whether it's winning a playoff game or two, and then maybe you lose in championship weekend, or maybe you win the whole thing. I think getting to the Final Four is what I think should be the baseline of success for this team this season.
Yeah.
I think that's a healthy expectation, not necessarily to win it all, because once you get to the Final Four, anything can happen. But I think setting that beyond the championship or bust, I think, well, looking at that because you're going to be in the Final Four in 2025.
Yeah.
And Alex Campbell mentioned that. You don't want to just coast into that, right? You want to establish yourself as a team to beat going into that 25 season. And a big part of that this year would be getting to the Final Four on your own accord.
Yeah. And I think 13 wins is fair, because I look at last year, that was the most wins in the season. That was Niagara, who was playing, I think, in a stronger Eastern Conference for them last year. And the talent is elevated, I think, across the league and here in the West as well. I mean, it's not going to be easy. So if they can have one win better than last year, I think that's huge. I think hosting that game, like the conference semifinal, to get to the Final Four is also an elevation there. If they can finish at the top of the conference, I think that is my projection is top of conference with 13, maybe 14 wins, but I'll stick with 13. But I don't think it's championship or bust, but I think it's championship weekend or bust. I think they have to take that next step and get to championship weekend. It also creates a buzz. I mean, from a marketing standpoint or excitement standpoint, with the championship coming here in 25 to Winnipeg, I do think it's championship weekend or bust. And yeah, and that's the other thing too, because I think, Taylor, you said that in a prior podcast with your conversations with Mike Morielli, that's not a guarantee, right? That they're in 25, that they're going to stick with the same format.
Mm. Correct. Yeah, the host isn't. I mean, at least not yet. The host isn't guaranteed to be in that final weekend for 2025. I mean, that might end up being the case, but he said they're currently discussing that. But just to backtrack a little bit, I'm gonna bump up my answer to 15 wins, since we all have the same answer. So
okay.
I'll be different here. So if I get that right, then I have some breaking rights amongst the group. Otherwise, we all have to share the glory, and I don't want that. So I'll bump up my answer to 15 wins with the Sea Bears.
You're just feeling good because your Pacers are going to the Eastern Conference Final, and they probably shouldn't have been there, right? So you ride that. You
probably
ride that
should
momentum.
have been there. Wow. Okay. You
I
slid in earlier that it's going to be a 4-game series. You're taking another shot there. That's okay.
Hey, they're fun
playing
team
with
to
house
watch.
money, man.
But
And the Heat didn't have Jimmy Butler, and the Cavs didn't have Donovan Mitchell the last couple of games. Do you want to play this game, Joey?
Thanks,
I do.
Yeah,
They're well
it's a great
rested.
game.
Your Pacers had to go through the 7-game
really shot
series.
70% from the field yesterday.
Yeah, well, hey, you're also
No big
playing the
deal.
Knicks, and the Knicks are going to Knicks. So, hey, it's fine. Go Celtics. I'm excited for this series. But
I'll see you in the
let's finish
finals,
with-
Christian.
There we go.
Okay, all right.
Wouldn't that be something?
All right, enough of this. Final remarks. We'll start with you, Dave. Any final remarks before we end this podcast?
Well, the NBA really wants an Indiana-Minnesota final, I'm sure.
Yeah,
so,
right.
That'll be something. That's what I'm pulling for. I'm excited to get this season going. I told everybody last summer that didn't go to a Sea Bears game, or maybe was sort of marginal basketball fan, whatever it may be, no matter what, you're going to enjoy your time at the game. And they've done a remarkable job in terms of putting on a really class experience, a fun experience. So end of the day, get out to those games, because they are they're not expensive. They're good family entertainment, and it's a lot of fun. And it's really remarkable what that place looks like and sounds like when all systems are firing. So I'm just excited to get the season going. I don't think you're allowed to just change your prediction midway through a podcast, but Taylor pulled that off. I'm sticking with 13 wins, and I'm excited to be at the game on Friday.
Yeah, Taylor also just had like the ultimate sports trip to Miami, so he's feeling good. He's feeling confident.
What can I say?
All right, Christian, final thoughts?
Like Dave, I think going to these basketball games has been a lot of fun. Now, I haven't been as a fan, right? I've been as a person calling the action on CBEL Plus, and it's been a lot of fun. I didn't know what to expect going into last year. Blew everything out of the water as far as I'm concerned. So I'm looking forward to a season that's going to feel like it's flown by, I'm sure. I'm looking forward to seeing if they can do it, right? Because I think win or loss, people are having a good time at games. As the newness wears off, as we saw with the Jets, eventually there are expectations to actually win something. But right now in year 2, this should be still in that honeymoon-ish stage, and it's such a tight product too, right? You're in, you're out. It's 2 hours. There's very little downtime. The target score finish, I can't say enough. If you're listening to Target Score Weekly in minute 47, you've probably watched a CEBL game. But I mean, the target score is awesome, right? After watching a lot of NBA playoffs. Boy, the last 9 points, they can be hard to get, right? And it creates a lot. Every game ends in a walk-off. And as a play-by-play guy, a home bucket to win and everyone goes nuts. I mean, there's nothing better than that. So looking forward to several of those this year at Canada Life Center and on the road too, because CJOB is going to Saskatchewan this week. We're going to Calgary in early June, and it should be a blast.
Yeah, I would love to see target score spread out even to like the high school level where you can't, dribble out and you got to win these games. But that's another conversation for another time. Last word to Taylor.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to their home opener. I think, last year, obviously the crowd was electric, sellout crowd after sellout crowd, record after record after record. But I think this home opener, like Dave said, like the word is spreading to the non-basketball folk. Like I have people who've never watched a basketball game in their life coming up to me asking me about the Sea Bears and getting tickets and whatever. So I think this year it's going to be even bigger and better. Because last year there's only 10 games, right? Or 11 games, including the play-in game. So it goes by quick, and a lot of people missed out on that. So I think it's going to be cool to see them, build off of that. But again, game 1, when Jared Ogunbemi Jackson gets announced to the crowd, that's going to be a huge pop. That's going to be really cool to see. His family alone will probably take up half the building, and so many of them haven't gone to see him play since he was with the Dinos, and he got to beat up on Dave's Westman or the Bisons down the street as well. But so that's gonna be cool to see. And then also too, legit 7-foot NBA talent and Byron Mullins play in Winnipeg for a full summer. When's the last time we've been able to say that? Never. So that's going to be really cool to see for local basketball fans as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to another awesome summer of pro hoops, and looking forward to talking to you guys a lot along the way. It should be fun.
Go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I apologize. I'll jump in on one real quick thing just on Jared, and I'm doing a horrible job as a promotions guy for the Winnipeg Wesmen, but I don't know if we'll see it throughout this season. I don't know, but Jared and Sean Moranin on the floor at the same time for Winnipeg sports fan, like 2 high school kids from Winnipeg to be playing in front of those crowds. I'm excited for Sean because I think it's going to upgrade his game for his final year with us. But what a cool thing that would be. Jared will have a huge fan base, and we know the type of fan base that Sean brings to games too.
Yeah, so pretty much filled up the IGAC for the Canada West Championships, the Moranin fan club. But no, I agree. It's going to be an exciting season. It's nice to see so much local talent, legitimate local talent too. These aren't flyer guys that are part of the Winnipeg roster. Season gets underway on Wednesday, May 22nd. That is in Saskatoon. They take on the Saskatchewan Rattlers. First look at Jalen Harris and his new Threads. That game will be on CJOB. Christian, you'll be out there, so make sure you're tuning in at CJOB 680 for that game. And then they come home on the 24th, the home opener. That sold out weeks ago, like 2 or more weeks before the actual game is taking place. So if you didn't get your ticket, that's tough. Hopefully there's something on the resale market for you, but that'll be an exciting game with the defending champion Scarborough Shooting Stars in town. And then they've got a bit of time off before they play their next game. I believe it's June 1st when they're at home as well. So Guys, thank you so much. Dave Larkins, Christian Aumell, and Taylor Allen, appreciate all of your time today for this season preview. We'll definitely do it again. Thank you for listening to the Target Score Weekly podcast. To stay up to date with Winnipeg Sea Bears and CBEL news, as well as future episode releases, follow Joey and Taylor on Twitter and Instagram at TaylorAllen31 and at Joey Slattery TV. And wherever you're getting the podcast, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode.